I'm just here for no apparent reason. So what's really going on with all of this? Where does this deep-seated aversion to telling others about Unitarian Universalism come from? The prevailing theory is that with some 90% of us having roots in other religious traditions or no traditions at all, we've brought with us some unresolved baggage about our early experiences of religion. Sometimes it shows up as anger or embarrassment, as shame or disdain, or as misplaced arrogance, complete with a tidy sense of UU superiority. Of course, many of us have been abused by religion and have the lasting scars to show for it. Others of us simply drifted away due to disillusionment or a process of deconstructing our former faith that, in the end, left us with little to hold on to. The net outcome of all of this, in my experience, seems to be that many, if not most UUs, especially those of us not born and raised in this tradition, get a wee bit anxious when others publicly promote their faith, and especially when that promotion turns to proselytizing with the unabashed goal of saving souls. There are understandable reasons why this might make some of us queasy. The religious zeal required to knock on door after door, facing hostility and rejection, can be off-putting. In this tradition, which teaches us to cherish our doubts, we are inclined to be at least somewhat skeptical of such true believers. I mean, how can anyone be so convinced that they are right? It must also be said that we live in a seemingly secular age. A few years ago, for reasons that are hard to explain, I was backstage at a taping of Canada's Got Talent. I ended up spending a couple of hours in a tiny green room with the comedian Martin Short and the opera singer Misha Brugger-Gossman. Let's just say that there was a lot of personality packed into that very small space. At one point in this gathering, I found myself in an awkward conversation with a woman who was also there, a Toronto socialite, who asked what I do. There was that temptation that every minister faces in such moments, the desperate pull to explain that I work as a writer or a mechanic or a tattoo artist. Anything to avoid being the total buzzkill by introducing myself as a member of the clergy. But I told the truth, and the woman recoiled and let out a little incredulous gasp as if to say, "Does anyone still do that kind of thing?" As she shook her head from side to side, she said, "You know, my husband and I must know 50 couples in this city, and I can't think of a single one of them that goes to church." I had no problem believing her. We live in secular times, or at least a time when we've largely agreed to keep our faith to ourselves. But this is changing. A few years ago, I heard Paul Bramadat, a Unitarian Universalist and professor of religion at the University of Victoria, describe how Canadian society is moving out of the pact that had been tacitly made as part of Pierre Elliott Trudeau-era multiculturalism, the mosaic, the idea that all are free to practice their religion, whatever it may be, but that religion is expected to remain in the private sphere, a matter of personal or even private concern. But as he pointed out, that pact is no longer holding in the way that it once did, as our country's growing religious diversity sometimes leads to disputes, debates over whether Muslim women in Quebec have a right to wear the niqab, or people of other faiths to express themselves through the symbols of their traditions, or around how sex education is taught in Ontario schools, or, just a few months ago, whether grade 8 students in the Woodstock Catholic School Board in Southwest Ontario can be compelled to make anti-abortion posters as part of a contest, complete with a cash prize from an outside organization. Bramadat's point when it comes to discussing religion in Canada is that the era of don't ask, don't tell is coming to an end. And the question for us as Unitarian Universalists is whether we are ready for it, whether we are willing and able to live out our faith more openly, whether we are ready to let our values guide our actions and our actions reveal what we truly believe. A few months ago, while on sabbatical, I was in the Ozark Mountains in the northwest corner of Arkansas. I was on a solo road trip with a different destination, but I decided to make a detour to the town of Bentonville. I had been curious about Crystal Bridges, the world-class art museum built there a few years ago by the Walton family of Walmart fame or infamy. The museum hosts a stunning collection of art, some of the best that money can buy, all in a beautiful building designed by Moshe Safdie, the great Israeli-Canadian architect who built Habitat 67 for the Expo in Montreal. Towards the end of my visit, I took in a powerful special exhibit that had just opened called The Dirty South, which explores the art and musical traditions of Southern Black culture over the past century. Early in the exhibit, I was in a room with a very friendly guard who, in true Southern style, couldn't quite keep himself from engaging in conversation with almost every single person who walked by. I was a bit distracted by his yammering, and I found it a little irritating as I was trying to read the artist statements on the wall. But when I started listening to what he was actually saying to people, I was immediately horrified. In an exhibit examining the brutal legacy of slavery and the resilience of Black culture in the face of ongoing racial injustice, this friendly white guard was making light-hearted comments about one of the pieces of art, a piece that was itself a symbol of protest over the appalling conditions in which so many Black people lived during the Jim Crow era in the United States. I was flabbergasted. And just at the point when I wondered if I was misunderstanding what he was saying, I caught the eye of the young Black woman to whom he was speaking. I could easily read the shock on her face. There was a quick moment of unspoken agreement between us that this was not okay. And I knew in that moment that the burden was on me to do something about what I was witnessing. It was a moment that I knew I needed to show up as an ally. But how? I opted out of speaking directly to the man, not wanting a confrontation there in the gallery. To my mind, this was a systemic issue, something the museum needed to address more broadly. I didn't want him reprimanded or fired. I instead wanted him and anyone working in the museum to be asked to think about the deeper meaning of the art around them, to be invited to reflect on how their words and actions in those galleries might affect those visiting the museum, and especially people going through that exhibit focused on the still ongoing work of racial justice. And more than anything, and at the very least, I just wanted this friendly man to stop making the same harmful joke to others who happened by, which he seemed more than ready to do, given that I heard him go on to make his comments again. But showing up in the ways we need to isn't an always easy thing to do. For starters, I had no idea where to begin, no idea how to make a meaningful difference in the situation. I walked through the rest of the exhibit, scoping out who I might speak with, but I was at a loss. That is, until I wandered into the gift shop just as I was preparing to leave. That is when I spotted Hannah, an employee in the shop filled with calendars and ornaments and reproductions of paintings in the museum. Hannah was young and tall and regal with a swirling head of red hair. And most importantly, Hannah was wearing two very big buttons. One said, "Ask me about my pronouns," and the other was a progress flag, the recent update on the rainbow pride flag that you may have seen in recent years. Alongside the traditional rainbow, it includes a brown stripe and a black stripe to be intentionally inclusive of Indigenous, Black, and people of color. And at the top, a chevron formed from the white, light blue, and light pink colors of the trans flag, signaling the inclusion of people of all genders and gender expressions. I will admit to you that when the progress flag first emerged a few years ago, I found it aesthetically jarring, and I quarreled with myself about whether the symbol itself wasn't straining under the pressure of trying to convey too much. Though I had already moved well past that academic argument some time ago, I came to appreciate the symbolic power of this complicated flag for all that it meant in that moment in the museum. The combination of those two buttons gave me the confidence that I could talk to Hannah and that they would know who I should speak to within the museum. So I said hello to Hannah and I thanked them for wearing their buttons. I cannot imagine it is an easy thing to do, to be a beacon of queer visibility in rural Arkansas. And then I said to them that their button, which to me pointed to an awareness of intersectionality, an awareness of how different oppressions can be linked, made me believe that they could be of help. So I explained the situation, I expressed my concerns, Hannah took it all in, and then I asked Anna who I should talk to, and Hannah gave me a name and an email address. And then I asked whether, given the nuance I was trying to convey, whether this person would really understand what I was trying to get at. And Hannah promised me that they would, and they did. After we parted ways, with deep thanks given for Hannah's help, I sat in the foyer of the museum well past closing time, typing out a long email on my phone. And then I received, within an hour, the most thoughtful response I could possibly hope for from the director of museum operations, indicating immediate steps to address my concerns at the highest levels, but all with the goal of growth and greater understanding, and most especially, grace. I will say that that afternoon was a moment of putting my own faith into action in some small way. Our commitments to racial justice have deep roots in my heart, to the point that I cannot let moments like that pass by without comment, even when it makes me uncomfortable or when it would just be easier to go along. But what I most want you to hear in this story this morning is that Hannah is the true hero. It was Hannah's courage to wear their values literally on their lapel that gave me the courage to ask for help when I needed it. I could not have done what I did without Hannah's help. As I drove on that evening, I thought of how the symbol of our flaming chalice came about in World War II as a way for people who are rescuing Jewish children from persecution to easily recognize one another as being truly trustworthy. The very first Unitarian chalices were not three-dimensional objects made of metal or ceramic with a burning flame at the center. The first chalices were actually a two-dimensional image worn as a lapel pin by volunteers of the Unitarian Service Committee in Europe as an indication to others in the know that they were part of a network of people involved in the great effort to save and serve human life. That is exactly what Hannah's buttons did for me. They told me that I could trust them. I have no idea whether Hannah is a Unitarian Universalist. It felt to me that they had a lot in common with many of the UU young adults I have known through the years. Either way, Hannah was living their values out loud. And because they did, something may have changed for the good that day. In this age of anxiety in which we are living, I dare say that we need more of us to be living our values out loud. I want to be more like Hannah, and I want us all to be more like Hannah, putting it out there, not proselytizing per se, but living in such a way that our actions reveal the values we hold and the faith that we profess. Be it in what we post online, how we move through the world, and how we are with strangers or our nearest and dearest. This is the path, I believe, to evangelism for Unitarian Universalists. Evangelism is a wounded word, but in its most basic definition, it means to share good news. So I challenge you to spend time in the coming days reflecting on what good news we have to share and on how you just might go about living your faith out loud. It's not so much because you may find yourself as a UU knocking on random doors, but because it's more likely that moments of opportunity will come knocking on your own door if and when you are paying attention. Moments when the values you live by may make a real difference to someone else. Moments when the reason for sharing good news may become truly and abundantly apparent. Amen.
I'd like to welcome Chalice Choir up to perform today's song for the day, Be the Change by Mark Kaplan and Colin Britt.
This congregation has a long history of care, vitality, and bringing people together to move the arc of justice forward. We have been able to live into our hopes and dreams because of the generosity of those within and beyond this community. Whether you are here in Worship Hall or anywhere else at all, you are part of this community. To make a gift in support of the work of this congregation, you don't need to use the baskets, which will soon be making their way among the pews. You are invited to go to our website or contact our finance manager to find out how to make a donation or to keep up with your pledge. Our gifts are freely given and gratefully received. We dedicate these gifts to the work of this community of faith, serving human wholeness, caring for the planet, upholding religious freedom, welcoming the stranger, loving one another. And now, following the theme of our choral piece earlier, please rise as you are willing and able as we join together in our closing hymn, Where My Free Spirit Onward Leads, number 324 in the gray hymnal.
Before we close this time of fellowship and reflection, yes, you can sit down if you will. A reminder that our online fellowship hour will begin at 11:30. For those who would like to access fellowship hour here, you can do so in the lounge, out those doors and around to your right. There you'll be able to connect with all joining from home and have discussions with those joining in person. We extinguish our chalice this morning to these words by Michael Schuler. We have reached the end of this time for the gathering of memory and for letting the imagination play with future possibilities. We have enjoyed magic moments and edified one another. Shall it be concluded then? Or will this adventure now commenced continue, our separate paths converging, meeting, merging in the unending quest for love more perfect, the joyous struggle for meaning more sufficient, and life more abundant? Is this the ending, to be an ending, or merely prelude to a new, more glorious beginning? I pose the question. In your hearts lies the answer. This morning's chalice is extinguished, yet the spark of our connections and faith remain. Jen, will you please bless us again?
Spirit of life, come unto me, sing
Go out into the world in peace. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings. Again and again and again. Blessed be.